United by their devotion to the Great Maker, the Centauri began expanding beyond their isolated settlements. Like-minded families merged their dwellings into larger collectives, while others migrated to more fertile lands with superior hunting grounds. As agriculture took root in Centauri culture, they evolved from hunter-gatherers to hunter-farmers. This transformation stemmed from a powerful combination of shared religious belief and collective self-interest. Yet not all developments of this era proved beneficial. While the Great Maker served as both provider and life deity, he was equally a god of war. Centauri leaders wielding authority and power turned their ambitions toward rival communities possessing desirable resources. This marked the rise of the first Centauri warlords, whose example inspired others to seize through violence what they could not obtain through diplomacy and cooperation. A brutal era followed as warlords consolidated their families and settlements into kingdoms, seeking protection from one another. Dwellings that once served merely as shelter from the elements were redesigned to withstand military assaults from rival kingdoms. The first fortresses emerged during this period, structures of wood and stone built atop commanding hilltops for maximum defensive advantage. Among the most formidable of these strongholds, ruins still stand on the mound of Gennari in the Rishi Plateau. From these fortified strongholds, warlords orchestrated campaigns of conquest that swept across Centauri lands like wildfire. Thousands perished in battles that expanded one warlord's domain, only to see those gains erased in the subsequent conflict. Territorial boundaries shifted with such frequency that accurately determining where one kingdom ended and another began became impossible. This period ranks among the most savage in Centauri history. The bloodshed ended with the Thexir Accordis, a treaty in which the four most powerful warlords agreed to cease hostilities and honor a unified map dividing the continent among them. The signatories largely upheld this accord, though it did not eliminate warfare entirely. Instead, it confined conflict to smaller warlords excluded from the negotiations. By partitioning the entire continent among the four kings, the Thexir Accordis denied legitimacy to any other claims of rulership. Consequently, while the four warlords ceased attacking one another, they gained free rein to subjugate the smaller communities within their newly defined territories. These smaller wars proved in many ways more brutal than their predecessors, though their outcomes were seldom in doubt. By the close of what imperial historians term Centauri prehistory, four Centauri kings remained, collectively ruling what they called the Vonadiro, the Great Empire. This political entity should not be confused with the later Centauri Empire, though it provided the foundational structure upon which the true planetary empire would eventually be built. The Great Empire endured for 11 generations, sufficient time to consolidate rule and suppress sporadic freedom fighter rebellions among a periodically restless populace. The Great Empire might have persisted in its four-way division far longer had it not been for the discovery of the Zon. Though no Centauri of the Great Empire era could claim true innocence, they labored under a dangerous illusion that they alone possessed sentience in the universe. Operating within this false certainty, Centauri civilization flourished under the Four Kings' rule. Peace fostered unprecedented cultural development and freed restless minds to pursue scientific advancement and exploration. After thoroughly mapping and settling their continent's northern and southern reaches, the Centauri yearned for new horizons. Fundamental innovations, the wheel, simple machines, evolved into sophisticated metallurgy and weaving techniques. When they finally set out to explore the vast oceans flanking their homeland, they did so aboard tall-masted vessels of remarkable endurance and craftsmanship. The early Imperial Age Centauri had become explorers and inventors rather than warriors. The savage violence of earlier generations had faded from their character. This transformation would prove their undoing. The first continental expedition departed from the easternmost shores of Centauri territory, seeking bold new adventures. They found adventure, but not survival. Months later, upon reaching foreign shores, they encountered a species whose existence they had never conceived possible. These inhabitants resembled the Centauri superficially but were covered in hair and lagged behind in both cultural and technological sophistication. No records document this initial encounter, but history confirms that first contact ended catastrophically. Nearly 1 year to the day after the Centauri vessels embarked on their voyage, the ships returned. The original Centauri crews had been slaughtered, their severed heads displayed along the deck rails. Aboard sailed hundreds of Zon, the species they had discovered. Port cities erupted in flames wherever these vessels made landfall, leaving devastation in their wake. The Centauri were unprepared for this surprise assault, much less for the fleet of newly constructed Zon warships that pursued them across the ocean. Though the Zon lagged behind in intelligence and development, they proved remarkably adaptive. Once exposed to a concept, they mastered it with alarming speed. Zon vessels were crude by comparison, but sturdy, and their crews were even more formidable. The invaders systematically destroyed Centauri coastal settlements, driving survivors inland to the relative safety of their interior kingdoms. This was the Centauri's darkest hour. An unknown enemy had struck without warning, finding them utterly defenseless. Having evolved beyond the need for standing armies, they had become a civilization of artists and explorers. Their kingdoms fell one after another to the Zon onslaught. Thousands died. Countless more became prisoners in their own cities, now under Zon occupation, forced into slavery. The four kings fell one by one. Isolated and unwilling to aid each other, none could withstand the Zon onslaught. 11 generations of peace ended in ruin as the great empire collapsed, its authority scattering back to the individual families and communities that had once surrendered it. From desperation came unity. Families banded together to form the houses, collectives forged from blood ties and shared survival, united under charismatic leaders who gave them singular purpose. Fortifying defensible strongholds, these houses wielded technological superiority and iron resolve to repel the Zon. Where the great empire had stood, a dozen smaller kingdoms now emerged from the ruins. Even the houses could not stand forever. When the mightiest among them fell to the Zon, the survivors faced a stark truth: divided, they would all perish. In a historic gathering, the house leaders forged a new alliance, the Centaurum, a united kingdom governed by the combined wisdom of the house elders. The alliance was fragile, but effective. United, the Centaurum drove the Zon back to coastal strongholds through a relentless campaign of victories. They reclaimed the heartlands of their continent, though what they won was often little more than ash and rubble. Yet the Zon no longer ruled them, that alone sustained their spirits in those brutal early days. Few captives were ever freed from Zon clutches. Death, the Centauri believed, was the kind of fate. Blood wrote the prehistory of the Centauri. Every mile reclaimed from the Zon was paid for in lives. Few records survive this era, but those that remain reveal a desperate rebellion, a people clawing their way toward freedom and discovering unity in shared suffering. The Centaurum became more than a government. It became the living symbol of their will to survive and their right to be free. The Centaurum's founding marked the beginning of true unification. What started as a war council evolved into the Republic, officially a confederation of independent families and freeholds governed by the Centaurum. In practice, few Centauri saw it as anything less than a continental empire. Even the Centaurum elders acknowledged this reality, and the people spoke plainly. They called it the Centauri Empire. The Zon remained a formidable threat. The Centaurum devoted its early efforts to repelling constant raids and achieving hard-won victories against entrenched coastal strongholds. Necessity drove innovation. Centauri war technology advanced rapidly. Slings yielded to bows, which yielded to the Shoalost, a long-stocked crossbow that would change the course of the conflict. Superior range solved the Centauri's greatest vulnerability. They could never match the Zon in close combat. Brute strength would always favor their enemies. But the Zon relied on thrown weapons when they fought at range at all. Armed with the Shoalost, the Centauri could strike from distances the Zon couldn't answer. The advantage lasted only a few years before the Zon adapted, but those years turned the tide. The Centauri won victories they desperately needed. The Centaurum army, armed with revolutionary technology, finally drove the Zon from Centauri shores. The most devastating innovation was explosive powder, granules that could propel projectiles and reduce fortifications to rubble. The cost was steep. Centuries of historical structures and irreplaceable lore destroyed in the bombardments. But the Centauri paid it willingly to purge the Zon from their homeland. Once awakened, Centauri wrath would not sleep. Freedom was not enough. Driving the Zon back to their own shores was not enough. The Centauri built warships bristling with cannons and filled with raiding parties. When their vessels next appeared on the Zon horizon, they carried a single message: extermination. Nothing less than total vengeance for centuries of enslavement and slaughter would satisfy them.